All right, here we go. Terrestrial biomes and climatograms. We're going to focus on terrestrial biomes. We don't have enough time to also address aquatic biomes like I did last year, but we can hit the terrestrial ones. So here we go. Oops. All right, so biomes are the major regional groupings of plants and animals discernible at a global scale. So that means looking at the world as a whole, I will be able to tell the difference between various biomes just based on the plants and animals that are there. Things that are living in a desert are drastically different than things that are living in like a tropical rainforest. Distribution patterns of these biomes are correlated with regional climate patterns and identified according to the Climax vegetation type. So on Friday, we're going to delve a little bit deeper into what we call Climax communities. Climax communities are those ecosystems that have reached a stable state. They're not continuing to grow, they're not dying off, they're just kind of maintaining, they're at their best and just kind of doing their community ecosystem thing. Based on those climax communities and those the vegetation in those climax communities, we can determine the specific biome of a area. So to understand all of the different biomes, we need to learn a couple things. The global distribution patterns. Where are they located? Like we're looking at a world map, where can we find each of these biomes? And in a given biome, like I said in the previous slide, they're going to have different plants and animals, even across continents. The types of animals, especially vertebrates. So yes, invertebrates are important, all the bugs and insects and slugs and snails and things, but vertebrates are particularly important to pay attention to when we're trying to identify a biome. Those animals' morphological, physiological, and or behavioral adaptations help us decide and differentiate between these different biomes. So for example, a jackrabbit. A jackrabbit is something that is native to a sort of dry desert biome. You won't find those in a tropical rainforest. They are adapted to that desert biome. They have really, really big, long ears that stand straight up. They use those as a physical adaptation to that hot, dry climate. In their ears, they have a lot of blood pumping, and all that blood is really close to the surface of their ear skin. And when they're out doing their rabbit things, whether that's nocturnally, which is most of the time, or here and there in the daytime, the air that hits those helps cool off the blood in the ears, which then gets pumped through their body because of circulation, and it cools down that animal. So they are adapted to their environment. We're also going to talk about climatograms or climographs. Two different words, same thing, just a little bit of difference in the way you spell it and say it. So when we're looking at a climatogram, we need to know what climate is. A climatogram is a sort of graphic display of a climate. And a climate is temperature and precipitation. It can be measured over a period of years or maybe even like 1 year, but it doesn't really get much smaller than 1 year. Most of the climatograms that we're going to see are like sort of averages over several years. When we're looking at climographs, they show us a biome's climate in graphic form. So they're essentially just graphs. We'll see a bar graph that indicates precipitation. Pay attention to the units. Depending on where this graph was made, it may be imperial like Americans, or it may be metric like the rest of the world. So be sure you're reading your units carefully. Inches or centimeters. Most of them are also actually millimeters, so difference there between metric and imperial systems. Same goes for the line graphs. We'll look at a line graph, it'll have both a bar graph on the bottom and a line graph somewhere on top of that. The line graph shows us the temperature. Once again, pay attention to those units. It could be measured in Fahrenheit or centigrade. Pay attention to those units because 100 degrees Fahrenheit is drastically different than 100 degrees centigrade. So our first example of a climograph, here we have the Sahara Desert. Very dry, very hot. How do we know? Well, let's look. At the bottom here, we have our precipitation. This one is called rainfall. I don't think it snows much at the Sahara Desert, so I think they just assume all the precipitation would rainfall. And so we have very, very, very little rainfall. It's measured in millimeters. It doesn't even get to a whole centimeter at any point during this year. Most rainfall happens during the winter months, very, very dry, no precipitation at all in the summer and early fall. This blue line up at the top is our temperature. Notice how hot it is. We're measuring this in centigrade, so we're looking at degrees Celsius. The coolest it gets is 30 degrees Celsius, which is still pretty warm. Like, I can't believe that's how low it gets. That's just like, that's still super hot. How can that be your low? But then it can get up to almost 43 degrees in the summer months. Super duper hot all the time, very, very dry. Kind of checks out for somewhere like the Sahara. A different one, Kansas, sort of middle America. We're seeing a more of a fluctuation in temperature here. Very cold in the winter months, much warmer in the summer and early fall months. Looking at the precipitation in the background here, we're seeing lots and lots of precipitation in the spring, pretty typical of most American places. Less precipitation in the winter. And the last one I wanted to show you I found really interesting. It is from somewhere in Australia. Australia is in the southern hemisphere, so that means their seasons are opposite of ours. Theirs are flipped because they're in the southern hemisphere. Our winters are their summers, and their summers are our winters. So let's take a look. I'm going to start with our precipitation at the bottom here, our little bar graph. Their December, January, February is actually their summer, our winter, and you can tell that the precipitation is pretty low in their summer. It's higher in their winters. This is June, July, and August. Much, much higher precipitation there. Looking at the temperatures, we can see the same thing. They are flipped from us northern hemisphere people. Really, really high temperatures in December, January, February, much lower temperatures in the June, July, August time. So they're flipped from us. I thought that was super cool. All right, let's get into some of these biomes. So there are a bunch of major ones: deserts, forests, grasslands, tundra, and aquatic. We're not going to touch on the aquatic. It breaks my heart, but we just don't have enough time. So here are some more like imagery specific to each of these. We have some forests at the top, desert, savanna, grassland. We got our two aquatic, marine, and freshwater biomes, which we're not going to talk about. And then a tundra. We're going to get into these next. So deserts. Notice how, when we're looking at our latitudes here is the equator. And then 30 degrees north and 30 degrees south is where you'll find almost all of the deserts in the world. These 2 points are also known as the Tropic of Cancer and Tropic of Capricorn. You're not going to have to know that, just kind of a nice little tidbit. But if you're looking for deserts, a great place to start is right at that 30-degree north and south latitude. When we're looking at the vegetation of deserts, most plants have waxy coated leaves. Well, that makes sense. If it's super duper hot, not a lot of precipitation, I need water as a plant to do my photosynthetic processes. Water is essential to all life. I don't want that to transpire and leave me into the atmosphere. I want to trap it in, keep that water and moisture inside. So that waxy coating helps protect the moisture from escaping. The other thing we want to look at are those animals. Most animals are small. Not only does this conserve water, if I'm smaller, I don't need as much water, but it also helps save on energy. If I'm a smaller animal, it doesn't take as much energy to keep me cool in such an extremely hot environment. The last little note about animals are that they are almost all nocturnal. It's going to be much cooler in the evenings than in the daytime, so they do most of their activity at night. Once again, our Sahara Desert Climatograph. High temperatures, low precipitation, hot and dry. Next up are grasslands, characterized by, well, you got it, grasses. It is a grassland. We're going to see lots and lots of grass, not a lot of big shrubs or trees, mostly smaller kind of bushes, but lots and lots and lots of grass. And these biomes are home to some of the largest land animals. Think elephants, rhinoceroses, giraffes, all those like big herd animals, like thousands of water buffalo, things like that. And that's because most of them are herbivores. And if I'm an herbivore, I need a lot of food if I'm a big animal. Where can I find a lot of food? Grasslands. So that's why we find most of our large animals in grassland areas, because there's lots and lots of food for them. Looking at grasslands themselves, there are two main types: tropical, warmer climates, and temperate, which is more of a medium climate when we're talking about grasslands. I'm going to bring back Kansas. Kansas is, in fact, a grassland biome, lots and lots of flat, grassy areas. We're seeing a fluctuation in our temperatures. We've got cold winters, warm summers, and about a medium amount of rain. Wichita, Kansas is a temperate grassland, characterized by the sort of medium amount of precipitation and medium average temperatures. It doesn't get really, really cold or really, really hot. It just kind of stays in the middle there. Next up is the tundra. The tundra is the coldest of all the biomes, out of all of them. And it is characterized by something called permafrost. So when I talk about permafrost, I mean it's literally frozen ground. Whatever dirt, soil, loam, whatever it is, it's frozen. If you try to dig a hole with a shovel, you're not getting anywhere. If you try to like break it, it actually fractures like ice. It is frozen solid. And because of this, there's very few nutrients. It is a nutrient poor biome. Not a lot of plants can grow in permafrost, so there's not a lot of nutrition. If there aren't a lot of plants, we don't have a lot of consumers. It's a barren biome. There's also very little precipitation. There is some snow because it is cold, so when it does precipitate, it is usually something like snow. But it's generally pretty dry year-round. So where can we find tundra? Let's look at a map here. It is limited to the northern hemisphere up at the top of the globe. Looking, it's the top of Canada, a little bit of Alaska, some Greenland, some of these more like icy islands up here, part of Canada. We would consider Iceland one of these tundra biomes. And all along the top of Europe here, Russia, a little bit of those Scandinavian countries, Finland, Sweden, Norway. Very, very, very cold, usually pretty dry. Not a lot of vegetation or animals going around. It's just kind of barren and sad. Here is Alaska, a part of Alaska that is considered tundra. As we can see, very low precipitation, not a lot going on there. And our temperatures are very, very, very cold. Their lowest temperatures in the winter are almost minus 35 Celsius. They max out in the summers at about 5 degrees Celsius. That is short summer weather for them. I think that is frigid. I am a California girl through and through. I get cold super easily. I would not want to live there. All right, moving on to forests. Forests, there are 3 different types that we're going to focus on, but generally they occupy about 1/3 of Earth's land area. So think about all of the land of Earth. 1/3 of that is forests. And then if we're thinking about the leaf area of every land plant, blades of grass, all of the leaves on trees, on bushes, shrubs, all of those leaves, 2/3 of that is represented in forests. So forests are a huge, huge, huge coverage of land. And they also contain about 70% of the carbon in all living things. Not only are they taking in carbon dioxide for photosynthesis, but if you think about, size, me compared to a tree, I am much, much smaller than a tree. So it's going to have more carbon in it than I am because it's much, much bigger. The 3 types of forests are tropical, temperate, and boreal, also known as taiga. We're going to talk about these as individual biomes. So first up, tropical forests. You should be fairly familiar with this, kind of like the Amazon rainforest. Tropical forests have the greatest diversity of species. Lots of different plants, lots of different niches, many different kinds of animals. This just explodes with diversity. Generally pretty warm, very moist, perfect for many different types of organisms. If we're looking at a map, they're found near the equator. Makes sense. It's really warm at the equator. And they're bound by the latitudes 23.5 north and south. So they're just below or just inside of those desert latitudes. So we got the equator, we got some tropical forests, then we got deserts. And because of its proximity to the equator, their days are pretty much always about 12 hours. So we have short winter days, long summer days, and that's because we're farther up in latitude, so we experience more of the Earth's tilt. At the equator, there's much less of that tilt that you experience. So for the most part, your days are the same, your climates don't change because you're at the equator. There isn't much tilt, you don't really experience seasons. So here is a Climatograph of Manaus, Brazil. As you can see, the temperature is pretty constant throughout the year, very warm. And our precipitation, high in the late winter and spring, low in those summer and fall months. So there is a fluctuation, but still pretty rainy all the time. Temperate forests, these also used to be known as deciduous forests. Whenever you hear the word deciduous, that means it's talking about a tree that loses its leaves, so trees that get naked in the wintertime. Where we find temperate forests are where we find lots of seasons, defined seasons. So think East Coast. They all have these beautiful fall seasons. Their leaves turn colors, they drop in the winter, Canada as well. And they have a sort of moderate climate. We see a difference between their seasons. Temperatures vary between not extremely cold and not extremely hot, but it's kind of like a nice middle zone. So here is Canada. Winnipeg is actually a temperate forest. And our temperatures do vary. It gets hot in the spring and summer. It gets cold in the fall and winter. And our precipitation mirrors that. We have a lot of precipitation in the summers and not a lot in the winters. Next up is the Boreal Forest. It's also known as Taiga. When I was at La Cañada and I was taking APES, I was taught that this was called a taiga, but they're trying to change terminology a little bit to be more accurate. So Boreal Forest is a more descriptive term for this type of forest. Now, Boreal forests are huge. They are the largest terrestrial biome, just like the biggest one out of all of them on land. Obviously, marine is much bigger because oceans are huge, but we're talking about land biomes. Boreal forests are the biggest, and they're found between 50 to 60 degrees north latitude. You cannot find these in the southern hemisphere. 15, 60 degrees south is mostly just ocean, so we're not going to see these boreal forests in the southern hemisphere. Their seasons are divided into short, moist, and moderately warm summers, and their winters are long, cold, and dry. When we're looking at vegetation, almost always evergreen. Things like conifers, pine trees, all of the bushes and shrubbery, they're going to be green all year round because when they are so far north, they're not getting as much sunlight, especially during the winter months. So they need to be green all year round to harness as much sunlight as possible to help them with photosynthesis. So here is a Climatograph of the Yukon, which is a boreal forest. And as you can see, temperatures are more on the low side here. Very cold in the winters, not too bad in the summers, averaging about 15 degrees Celsius. But our precipitation is super duper low. Not a lot going on there. Low, dry biome. So here's a little organization that I like. It helps sort of put everything in its place. There are a couple on here that we didn't talk about, but they are here for your reference. So when we're talking about temperature, there are 3 different categories: tropic, which is hot; temperate, which is kind of medium; and Arctic, which is cold. Precipitation, we have stuff that's wet, kind of medium, and dry. And where we have intersections, those are our biomes. So wet tropical would be a rainforest, tropical rainforest. Wet and sort of medium temperate would give us our deciduous forest, or that temperate forest. Cold and wet will give us a boreal forest, or the taiga. Medium and warm, tropical savanna, so that's more like where you'll find lions and elephants and antelope and things like that. The ultimate medium temperature, medium precipitation gives us our temperate grassland, that one in Kansas. And a medium precipitation and very cold gives us our tundra. When we're looking at deserts here, dry and hot. Temperate desert, that's one we didn't really talk about, but it's pretty self-explanatory. Not a lot of precipitation, kind of medium temperatures. And cold desert, this is what we would classify Antarctica as. Very, very, very little precipitation, super duper cold. All right, that's the end of the slideshow. Any comments, questions, concerns, clarifications? Do I need to go back for notes?